Some insight into the participatory nature of perception may be gleaned by considering the craft of the sleight of hand magician. For the conjurer depends upon this active participation between the body and the world for the creation of his magic. Working, for instance, with a silver dollar, he uses his sleights to enhance the animation of the object, generating ambiguous gaps and lacunae in the visible trajectory of the coin. The spectator's eyes, already drawn by the coin's fluid dance across the magician's fingers, spontaneously fills in those gaps with impossible events. And it is in this spontaneous involvement of the spectator's own senses that enables the coin to vanish and reappear, or to pass through the magician's hand. After flourishing a silver dollar in my right hand, for example, spinning it a few times to catch the audience's attention, I may suddenly hide the coin behind that hand, clipping it between two fingers so that it is no longer visible to their gaze. If, an instant later, I reach into the air on the other side of my body with my left hand and bring into view another silver dollar that had been clipped behind that hand, the audience will commonly perceive something quite wondrous. The audience will commonly perceive something quite wondrous. They will not perceive that one coin has been momentarily hidden while a wholly different coin in another place has been brought out of hiding, although this would surely be the most obvious and rational interpretation. Rather, they will perceive that a single coin, having vanished from my right hand, has traveled invisibly through the air and reappeared in my left hand. For the perceiving body does not calculate logical probabilities. It gregariously participates in the activity of the world, lending its imagination to things in order to see them more fully. The invisible journey of the coin is contributed quite spontaneously by the promiscuous creativity of the senses. The magician induces us to assist in the metamorphosis of his objects and then startles us with what we ourselves have created. This is a passage from the marvelous book by David Abram, The Spell of the Sensuous, which is, I believe, 20 years old now. It is extraordinary work of philosophy, which charts the terrain between language, the alphabet, and perception, and the embeddedness in the flesh of the world, rather, or the sense fields. So, what the magician appears to be about, fundamentally, is a type of mediation, a type of mediation of the world to itself. So, for example, if this were possible in a purely how do you say it? Purely rational sense, then we would live in a very different universe in which we do. But the point I'm trying to make is it's in the lacuna, in the play between light and shadow, that magic takes effect. And this is not the case purely with physical objects, but rather with ideas as well. So an adept magician can cause fundamental changes in the field of the world, principally through language and through the word. And imagine if instead of this idea of two coins, one disappearing and one reappearing elsewhere, you had an idea of a concept that changes in a perhaps a subtle way, or a word that might reframe perception in such a way that we see things we didn't see before. And so central to the idea of any kind of magician is the idea of a spell. And a spell is, in effect, the arrangement of elementary components or letters into a type of whole that is perceived as an entity in and of itself. So a word is inherently a spell. But the thing about magic words is magic words such as abrahadabra or what's another one? I don't want to say hocus pocus, but people say hocus pocus as an example of the nonsense word the magicians use. It initially referred to the mass, hoc est corpus. This is the body. So the idea was hocus pocus is that kind of gobbledygook or gibberish, more magic words that the papists use, right? Hocus pocus. But the point is these cases of language demonstrate an unusual use of it. We tend to think of language as referring to things in the world, as picking things out. But the magical use of language doesn't refer externally. It, in a sense, conjures up an energy in and of itself. For example, abrahadabra could be said to be a nonsense word, but as you can see in the work that we've done over the course of this class, it is in itself a kind of a performance. It creates these networks, as we've seen, of nodes and loci, and it can be used to reference other things and also to compress ideas into elaborate frameworks. So it isn't so much what the word means as what the word does. And this is where magic comes into place. Is the magical action refers to an action usually of meaning creation that transforms the world. And now, it doesn't have to be a word, it can be a gesture, but a gesture is very similar to a word. It is a controlled meaning generating action that triggers some kind of response in the world. So Aleister Crowley defined magic as the science and art of causing change in conformity with will. And by giving it this enormous and broad definition, he was able to include perfectly ordinary activities under the umbrella of magic, as well as operations under the aegis of a magical operation itself, right? Like a within a circle, or set up as a kind of a ritual. But in book 4, or Magic and in Theory and Practice, he basically talks about the process of writing the book itself as being equivalent to a magical process. So the wand is the pen, the spirits are the publishers, the pentacle is the physical book itself, the sword could well be the editorial process. And so he basically lets us see that the mythopoeic magical language can actually be translated into mundane terms as a philosophy of pragmatic action. But at the same time, it also allows itself to permit such acts as magical ritual spells. So, what precisely is magic? Is it the science and art of causing change in conformity with will? I acknowledge this definition and I don't deny this definition. What I found interesting about magic is that there are many different definitions, and they all sort of act as elaborations or what can we say? Contributions to the overall concept of magic. The fellow who wrote Advanced Magic for Beginners defines magic as I believe the science and art of experiencing truth. Science and art, right? The analytic and the synthetic. So that's an important thing, is that in both those definitions, you've got this concept of the creative as well as the analytic. And magicians very much lean on both sides of the brain, if you will, using both the left and the right. Although the magician path on the Tree of Life is largely towards the level of understanding here. So this would be considered the left brain, and responsible for intelligence and calculation, reason, and control, language. So it's interesting, of course, that you would see the magician operating, the magician having the numeric value of 1, which is the wand itself, and the Hebrew letter bet, representing house, and having the value of 2 suggests actually Chokhmah, the other side of the tree. Again, all these paths up here are wildly intertangled, but it makes sense that the magician is here, because the magician is ultimately a controlling force. We've had this experience in a way of the lifting of the veils and the removal of the worldview that sort of divides us into objects and subjects. And beyond that worldview is this ultimately entangled space. And the magician works within this entangled space. Sometimes the magician operates to create the veils that prevent others from sharing the perception, thereby creating a kind of a leverage, an advantage over the non-magician. But in essence, the magician represents skillful action and control within this space of collective dreaming. And so when we perform any kind of magical act, where we are expressing our energy and our intent, we expect the universe to manifest a synchronicity that will flow in line with that intent. And this supposes a worldview that has, on some level, collapsed the Newtonian subject-object dichotomy, or dualism. So that much is obvious. But let's look a bit more at the magician's tools. So the magician is armed with the 4 suits of the tarot. So at this stage of the process, we can expect to crystallize our skill set, to crystallize the 4 tools in their expression of the 5th force. The 5th force is not explicit in the tarot. It is not one of the suits, but it can be understood as the entire major arcana. in toto, can be understood as the fifth element, quintessence. If we're looking at Enochian, there's a much more prominent place for the fifth element in there. Here we have an example of the wand, the cup, the sword, or athame, and the pentacle. And these are objects that have come to me over the years that that I use to represent these four tools: the will, the imagination, the intellect, and the physical body. So, in effect, the four worlds are symbolized or concatenated into these four objects. And the irony of this is these are all pentacles. Everything here is a physical object. So they're all pentacles. So actually there's a 16-fold logic, believe it or not. So each one of these has a physical body. It has a reason for being, conceptual body. It has a imaginal counterpart, and it has a fundamental energy which it represents. So there are four levels of each of these. This being the anchor, or the physical instantiation of this, we'll say, stack of potencies. And what's interesting in this 16-fold logic, and I will point to the court cards as basically embodying this, right? So you could say that the Page of Wands is the physical wand. The Knight of Wands is the concept of the wand. The Queen of Wands is the emotion of the wand and the or imagination of the wand, and the King of Wands is the fundamental intent. What binds these all together or entangles these all together is this mysterious and amorphous fifth element, which quite rightly is not given a discrete object. Although we'll see that there are sometimes tools used to represent it. So these all emerge as expressions of this uncompounded fundamental plenum, and they lead us back into it, which is why these, as activated tools of the psyche of the magician, because this is really what we're doing, is we're in this entire process seeking to crystallize these faculties in such a way that we can engage not just a philosophy, but a practice of manifestation and demanifestation using these tools or these faculties. For example, a pentacle is a physical object. To manifest a physical object on purpose, to create something, you have to intend it. Like for example, our decks, right? The Course. The Course has given us the ability to produce a tarot deck. So there was an intent, then there was a visualization of it. The Course itself became the framework that made this feel possible. So the intent was your decision to join the Course, to do this thing. So that's the wand. The Course is the cup. The work, day to day, week to week, is the sword, and the finished deck is the pentacle. And I'm sure as you think about this in other permutations, you'll see more and more and more. Really what this is teaching us, what this Kabbalistic method is really teaching us, is how to bring things into manifestation through 4 stages, and how to bring things out of manifestation in 4 stages. If you have a physical manifestation that is problematic, such as a disease, then you find, so you've got a symptom and you find the cause. Then you supply a cure, as well as support it with the visualization of, you would supply a cure based on the cause itself. But you'd go further than that. You'd supply some kind of visualization of getting healthy, right, from this disease. Let's say you have, I don't know, let's say, well, you can go very seriously into something like cancer. There is, I'm not making the claim that you can just visualize cancer away, but the chance of recovery is a lot greater if you are supporting. You're not just going through you're not just treating it like a mechanistic procedure. You're also engaging your emotions in some way, and ultimately it's the intent that will, if not determine, tip the scales in most situations of serious illness or so on. The intent to remove such a thing from bothering us, from the world. And you'll remember that when we studied Abrahadabra in the Chariot, it followed exactly the same logic. There is the pyramid of manifestation and the pyramid of demanifestation, and it essentially takes things into and out of the world by means of the 4 levels. The 4 levels are 10, right, because of the tetractys of the decad. So the Sephirot themselves are the stages by which anything develops. And we can develop or counter-develop anything if we follow these recipes thoroughly. And so this is really the secret of the magician, is appearance and disappearance through the use of words, through the use of imagination and the use of these formulas. This being the sacred name of God, it is Yod He Vav He, right, the 4 worlds. It is considered to be, in effect, a blueprint for the universe, and therefore gives us the ability to play with existence and non-existence within this space. I have given magic a slightly different definition. I've called it the pressure of art brought to bear on time. And why have I done that? Well, partially because I'm a calendar magician, but I want to go deeper than the formulaic accounts of magic, or the orders, or even the idea that magic is a formalized system or formalized systems. Because obviously I do work with formalized systems, but there is an aspect to magic that is deeper and more fundamental than any of these systems that exist can really do credit to. And at that level, it's the closest analogy I can think of is cave paintings. The intense effects on consciousness of creating an image in an environment such as a dimly lit and a deep cave. The act of producing such a work dramatically changes consciousness, and therefore dramatically changes the experience of time. It increases certain probabilities and decreases other probabilities. So really the act of intended art is a magic that runs deeper than, in my opinion, any kind of lackluster approach to a ritual magic. Now, a fully engaged ritual act is very, very powerful. Don't get me wrong, especially when amplified by a system such as the Kabbalah, which has all sorts of compression layers and all sorts of ways of kind of telescoping energy into higher and higher levels of intensity. But if the spirit isn't there, if you just go and read the words without that intensity, without a little bit of fear or awe or respect, then it's unlikely that anything really will happen. There has to be an altered state of consciousness. And art, I would say, creativity, I would say, is the primary example of that force. And so a work of art that is fully married to the emotion of creativity is a powerful act on time. This is why within the framework of the calendar we've been creating artwork, because this impresses our intent, our awareness upon time itself, like picking a stamp on wax. And so we will have crafted memories that are like batteries. As we go on into the rest of our lives, we will look back on this process and look at the objects that we've created as essentially holding the energy of these moments. And memories either support us or they drain us. We have many memories that can affect us in ways that are kind of deleterious, right? Whereas when we craft a memory through art, or in any way, any self-conscious way, when we craft a memory that in a way is a gift to our future selves, we are producing a battery that supports us. And so I want to encourage you to consider the magician as being in cooperation with an infinite line of future selves and supplying those selves with memories that have a quality and value. And those memories can very well be physical tarot cards or dramatizations of the tarot experiences that we've all been doing both consciously and unconsciously through this process. And in that respect, bringing the pressure of art to bear on the experience of time, like gradually shifting the course of a great big boat, for example. Sometimes very small acts can shift an enormous momentum, can cause a great turning to occur. And that is the case with the consistent applied directed use of art. So that is science and art. So the pressure of art brought to bear on time. How that pressure is brought to bear and how time is understood is the science. So another way of looking at this card is that Bet means house. So as Heidegger said, language is the house of being. Being occupying this kind of vast experience of reality, and language domesticates it in some way. And it includes certain elements and excludes other elements. And as we can see, our habits of using language are based on deeper patterns than the purely superficial. And when we do magical contemplation, when we contemplate the tarot, when we learn the tarot deeply, the system itself begins to supply the furniture. So we've got these metaphors such as a lady calming down or taming a lion, or a confrontation with the devil, or hanging upside down. We've got these metaphors that operate like rooms or like furniture, furnishings of this house. And we learn to start to think and speak as if we are within these types of metaphor, these types of parameter. And this has a very subtle effect of feeding back into itself. It tends to increase the probability of encountering events that we will recognize as being part of the furniture of our house. So think about what this might mean in a totally different system, like, say, within the Mayan calendar or within a Chinese perspective. They're not using the tarot, and yet they are well equipped with magical systems that will enable them to essentially live within this world created by the word. And the word on these various different levels, from the deepest metaphor to the outermost utterance. And the word can, of course, be just purely representational, like teapot, or purely performative, like yo! And so the potency of the magician is to arrange and rearrange and to build these houses. According to Gilles Deleuze and Felix Guattari, an artist arranges blocks of sensation or blocks of affect, and that operate as these enduring memorials of a particular sensation. In fact, he says the only thing that endures is art. And the artist arranges these in such a way as to produce a type of theater, a type of house. So dwelling in such a house produced by art is a way of creating a world. So really what it comes down to is the magician is a creator of worlds. The creator and uncreator as well, because the magician has this double capacity. So we could see this picture, this classic picture of the pointing both above and below, creating the connection, as indicating purely a link between heaven and earth. But remember, this link goes both ways. So things can be brought into manifestation through the use of these four energies, fire, water, air, and earth, or brought out of manifestation. And this is continuous. You see the lemniscate, of course, over the magician's head indicates their participation in eternity itself. And we see below a great flowering as well as above. The other thing to be noted is the table. The magician is equipped with a table. The magician has cleared a table upon which these tools can be placed. And this is important. Altar magic is exceptionally useful to work with, because it teaches you how to create a blank space and then to populate it with discrete objects, to put them on and then take them off the table. And in doing so, helps us understand how to clear the mind, how to clear the energy of life, and to avoid clutter, which is the enemy of the magician. The magician's efficiency can be impeded by clutter. What else? Let's have a look at some of these. Here's Leonora Carrington's. It's a lovely image of the magician. Again, the table. This is getting closer to the Marseille style, where the magician is really a conjurer. He's not this wild wizard Gandalf type. He's a trickster. He's playing with reality and illusion outside of the bounds of this concept of true and false. He's creating worlds through, by means of the, I guess, ambiguous nature of creativity. Is it true or is it false, right? You know, some would say that a work of fiction is a lie, but that's a very stark way of looking at things. I think recently Richard Dawkins came out against Winnie the Pooh because it was ecologically unfeasible to imagine a donkey living next to a bear, living next to an owl, living next to a pig. And he thought that that was going to have a corrupting effect on the youth. Because in his mind, I'm sure, it implies falsity, right? Fiction implies falsity. But we're talking about a concept of fiction that is neither true nor false, but is constitutive of worlds. And in some ways, when according to the Popperian analysis of religion or unfalsifiability is considered by many skeptics to be equivalent to falsity, which to me seems very reductive and quite silly, because unfalsifiability is precisely that it can't be made false, nor can it be proposed to be true. So unfalsifiability is a claim that can be neither shown to be true nor false, and these are usually the claims that are thrown out as absurd by scientific skeptics. But at the same time, unfalsifiability is the strength of the creative artist. A work of fiction, Homer, is unfalsifiable as a work of fiction. As a historical account, maybe it is falsifiable, but as a pure story, is unfalsifiable, and so it carries with it these hooks, these dynamics, these metaphors. It is much, much, much the richer for being unfalsifiable than if it were to be subject to be reduced to truth or falsehood. And that's the beauty of the magician, is the richness of the worlds that can be created in between these parameters of verifiable and unverifiable, right? So the magician who plays with appearances produces something that's more than the sum of its parts. It produces experiences, memories, metaphors, potentialities that kind of hover over the world like a virtual envelope. And I think it's fair to say that the study of tarot, the study of magical systems, is the creation of this virtual envelope that out of which any number of actions can transpire. I heard it once referred to as unreal causes with real effects. And so, or imaginary causes with real effects. Lon Milo Duquette was famous for saying, of course the spirits are imaginary. And of course the spirits are real. Most people just don't credit their imagination with being as real as it is. So the idea that this virtual envelope that the magician cultivates out of language and out of imagination and out of focus and practice is capable of shaping events. In other words, of bringing art to bear upon the unfolding of time. Here we have this one is a much more sort of alchemical, occulty one. This is the Magus from the point of view of the Tarot of the Holy Light. There's a great novel called The Magus by John Fowles. If you really want to understand this card, I highly recommend it. It's a classic. Here's my version, which is just a little man in a house. It's an older version of it. I recently, using Black Mirror scrying, produced this version. And this version is a picture of a guy making stained glass windows. And I guess to some degree this really speaks about my method of doing magic, which is creating these pictures that allow the light to shine through. And the pictures in and of themselves are purely subjective, but they are arranged in architectures that allow an experience to be had of the architecture itself. And for those of you who end up working with me in the Mercury count, we'll do some real we'll do quite a bit of this type of scrying, and we will explore a whole world by creating little images, little scryed images. But to a great degree, we've been doing this already in the tarots we've been producing. And the use of scrying is a way of getting our own unconscious, if you will, into the active role of showing us how we frame the world. Because, you know, when they say that magic is about mirrors, it's as much about frames as it is about mirrors. Mirrors without frames are framed by their framelessness. So my sense is that it's really in in how mirrors and how windows and how doors are framed that the magic art selects for the success of certain probabilities and minimizes the success of other probabilities, which is pretty much what we're doing when we practice meditation, when we work with the cards, when we return again and again to this art, is we're seeking to have some kind of control over what happens, what unfolds. And part of that seems to be about relinquishing a certain kind of control to a higher influx. But the magician in particular wants to work with this concept of control. When we get to the Fool, of course, this radically changes, and as we'll see. But the magician's ability to channel the unmanifest into the manifest, or bring the manifest back into the unmanifest, has everything to do with control over time. Here we have, actually, before we get to my favorite, I'm going to, we have this lovely bateleur, which means juggler, jongleur. To juggle physically is a very, very good practice for learning magic. I highly recommend learning how to physically juggle. You weave these balls in a lemniscate or figure eight fashion, and it will teach your brain to perceive time kind of moving slower. It is a mathematical activity. It's very, a lot of recreational mathematicians love juggling and bell ringing. That's the other one. Church bells are also similarly mathematical and periodic, because it's playing with periodicities, which is basically playing with time. Shorten the weave, tighten the weave, etc. Before I actually move on, just on that note, it's very fair to say that the force card, right, or the fortitude card or strength, is very much expressive of the same magical potency of time. The figure in the Rider-Waite also has a lemniscate over her head, but this time it's tilted. It's very much engaged, where the magician's is purely horizontal. But I have heard the argument that strength represents the magic force itself. The chariot represents the vehicle or the word through which the magic travels, and the magician is the agent of the magic. Here we have Crowley's version. Crowley's version is pretty cool because it kind of looks like a guy surfing. And surfing has often been connected to magic as well. So moving fluidly across this mobile surface. And he's juggling all these various different tools of art. And interestingly, he's got a little ape down there. The ape of Thoth, the cynocephalus. I remember reading something that was trying not to be pretentious, and it said, the micturating cynocephalus. I thought that was one of the funniest things I've ever read. Micturating means peeing. So yeah, they decided instead of saying the pissing monkey, they said the micturating cynocephalus. So there you go. I think that's pretty hilarious. Right. So the ape mocks the magician, apes it. And so in a way, and it's been said again by Crowley, the word of wisdom weaves the web of lies, weds irreducible infinities. When wisdom is put into words, it is invariably falsified, and it is mimicked and imitated by those who see the words and guess at their power, but have not yet activated the capacity to generate the words themselves. So the mimicry produces a kind of a smokescreen effect around the magician. And that is always present. Thoth is always mimicked by the kind of the repercussions of the word, which is to say that in a sense, every magical action upon the world has unpredictable and unintended consequences. So perhaps it could be said that the goal of the magical arts is not to achieve magic, but to transcend magic. Because in its purest capacity, it invariably entangles us in karmas, in returning into a kind of a web of lies, essentially, because the word produces precisely that. Think about all these beautiful metaphors. You know, the book of Genesis, which is probably one of the most incredibly rich and layered metaphors in all of human creative history, and yet it becomes twisted into this literalist account that produces great hardship and great delusion and great falsity. So this is the tragedy of the magician. And so this house in the wilderness, if you will, this house of language, this habitat for human thought, is the last outpost of the sensible or intelligible in the tarot. Beyond the magus, the concatenation of intelligence and power and control and focus, is of course the fool. The fool is outside, is the wilderness, in a sense, the wilderness of pre-linguistic awareness. We don't have to talk about that just yet. I want to say one thing before I forget it, which is we talked about these three paths representing the three ways of the three keys to reading, to a successful reading. One is the deck, the wisdom of the deck, the wisdom of the reader, and the wisdom of the questioner. So the wisdom of the reader is, of course, the magician. So your actual inner house, which is to say your memory house, your organized intelligence, as it has accumulated a learning of various different tarots and various different methods and various different numbers and connections and spells, that is the measure of the reader, is their capacity to work with this house of knowledge. Now, if for example they are deeply unequipped, then the reading will reflect the depth of the wisdom of the practitioner. It is not the case that the practitioner is just an aside to the reading. I had some people approach me at one point and they had the audacity to say, "We don't trust you, but we trust the cards." As if somehow the cards would of themselves yield truths, and they do in a sense that the art yields truth, but the magician is an essential component. The reader is an essential component, and of course, in a case like that, they were under the impression that they were the magicians. So there was no fool, there was no querent, there was just another magician who wanted to use my cards and interpret them themselves. So that produced an unsatisfactory result. But the point is that all this training, all this meditation, the deepening of our understanding of the tarot and of magic in general is what puts us in the position to act as advisors. And really it's about how we solve the problems of our own lives, right? It's, in a sense, you can have a wise person that knows no tarot at all or anything like this, who has accumulated it through practical wisdom. And that's really the point, is the reader's practical wisdom, their capacity to solve problems, is in many ways the key. And the magician is the great pragmatist who is willing to use truth, falsehood, fiction to create worlds. And I'll say just one thing about this, my favorite classic Visconti Magus. He's got, of course, what looks like a pen, which is the wand, a little knife, which is a sword, some dice, or I would say maybe coins, which would be the pentacles, a little cup, and then this object, which I recall reading in a book as being some sort of a dish. The commentator on this card called this object a dish. I do not think that this is dish. I think it is a conch. And I think it's fair to say that the fifth element, in my understanding, would be the conch. The conch, which has a labyrinthine internal nature, which can be blown for this magnificent unifying sound, and which has come to symbolize the magician. For example, in The Ever-Present Origin, this phenomenally interesting book that I highly recommend, he talks about magic as being the magical stage of humanity as being akin to or connected principally to the ear and to the faculty of listening. And so I think that I'd like to leave with this idea that the fifth element sometimes is symbolized by a lamp, but I prefer to see it as a conch. Remember, we can hear the sea in a conch, right? If you've listened in a seashell. I want to leave off with this idea of the fifth element as this deep listening. And somehow that seems to me to unify the other faculties. The intent, the imagination, the intellect, and the body. If we can find a third ear through which we can listen to the play of these elements, then that's one way of connecting to spirit. And the magician who is a good listener is endowed with potent words. And so I will leave you with this house of cards, and I'll see you in class. And my name is Dr. Peter Deschemin, and this is the Force of Life Venus Calendar course, Meta Magic Tarot, week 31, the week of the Magician.